may be that when you turn the television on and find yourself doing a little bit of channel surfing, you may come across the very common and normal evening news story about unrest and violence in some faraway place in another part of the world. And if you pay closely and pay close attention, and if the video that you watch has audio feed as well, you might hear the very common reoccurrence of some soldier out in the middle of a dusty battlefield, holding rifle to his shoulder, and while engaging in violence and war, screaming out in another language, "God is great. God is great," over and over. This phrase that seems to be a perversion of faith. Or maybe on some random Sunday morning you're changing the same channels and come across some fellow Christian preacher. And listening closely, maybe you hear a message that isn't one all too familiar. Maybe the message sounds as if not everyone is welcome. Sounds harsh and critical to those who struggle with life, struggle with their faith, struggle with their identity. Maybe you hear messages even of prejudice and hate. Maybe you hear some of the worst messages that someone can offer of exclusion, condescension, and condemnation. These ancient perversions of faith, these ancient evils of religion are not new to our age. And so in our world, we have people going around who with some wisdom say we should just simply do away with faith, do away with religion. And they'll point to these two examples. They'll point to how religion is so frequently linked to violence. Or they'll point to examples where religion is so often used to justify prejudice, hatred, and condemnation. And so today, mindful of this ancient evil at the heart of faith, we hear the story of the Epiphany of Jesus. And in some real way, if you listen closely, if you go deep into the story of this gospel passage, if you hear what this is really about, we today stand up with a great joy, with an optimism that is rare in the world today, and with a hope at the knowledge of the beautiful baby in the manger. We stand up with the same voice and we say, we are opposed to religions of violence, and we are opposed to religion of hatred and prejudice. We rather accept the gospel message of a beautiful baby, a God of humility, whose angels proclaimed his birth with the message, "Behold, I bring you glad tidings of great joy, tidings of good news for the oppressed, joy and hope for sinners, welcome and uplifting hope for those who are beat down and poor in this world." This is our gospel. This is our faith. And in a world that tells us, if you are silly enough to believe, just keep your faith to yourself, we today stand up like these magi who are willing to go to great lengths and to face great difficulties and to struggle with the politics of their world. We stand up and say, we will not stay silent. We will proclaim a message, not of violence, no, not of hatred, absolutely not, but one of joy, compassion, mercy, and optimism as we begin this new year, as we rejoice in the joy of a newborn child who has come to set us free, come to liberate us from the strife and the struggle of this world, to give us a message of compassion, mercy, and peace. This is the point of the Epiphany. Listen to the story yet again. Go a little deeper and hear what's really going on. The Magi travel from a great distance, seeing the star, knowing the wisdom of the ancients that the star was the announcement of a new king, not any king, the Messiah. And so arriving in Jerusalem, the capital, They went to the king, King Herod. Herod held on to political power with great bloodshed and violence, corruption and evil. He was not a good nor popular king. But nobody dared step out of line, for if they did, they know they would die. They went to Herod not knowing this, and Herod says to the Magi, "When you find him, let me know so that I can go do him homage." Hear the duplicitous and evil plan. He intended to do to Jesus what he had done to so many before. He intended to hold on to power with more bloodshed and violence. We know that shortly after this, he in fact did go and kill thousands of young boys, hoping to kill Jesus. But notice also what happens. It's not just the corruption of violence in this story that Jesus seems to stand in opposition of, but it's also bad religion. It's also the hypocrisy of those religious leaders who also failed to see the announcement of a new Messiah. Remember, King Herod gathered all the leaders of the temple. King Herod gathered all the scribes and all of the religious priests and all of the religious leaders of his day, and he asked them, he said, "Tell me, where's the Christ supposed to be born?" And so they tell him, it's in the Old Testament, it's in our ancient prophecies where Jesus was to be born. They knew. Did any of them go with the Magi? Did any of the priests in Jerusalem, the leaders of the temple, the royal and holy scribes, all of these devout and learned people, did any of the religious leaders pack up their books, gather their things, and go with the Magi to worship the new Messiah? No. And so even in Jesus' day, even at the time of his birth, the same corruption that we know at the heart of so many different moments of faith and religion was there as Jesus entered this world. The darkness that he came to oppose as the light of this world was already deep and dark. The way in which Jesus ended up dying on the cross for us was because he confronted both the terror of violence and bloodshed and the evil of corrupt and self-righteous religion. He was willing to stand up against the darkness in our world so that we could be shown a new light. He stood up for us, for those who were poor, for those who struggled, for those who knew the burden of sin, for those who needed salvation. He bestowed upon us a heritage so joyful, so wonderful, an image and an incarnation of a God who was born in a barn. He came to our world in the most humble of ways, the most poor of situations, the most despised of people, born in a barn in the midst of the cold and the stench of animals. He came to us with nothing but humility and love. And he died for us because he stood against the corruption of violence and self-righteous religion. This is our heritage. And St. Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, rejoices in this when he says, "Brothers and sisters, you have heard the stewardship of God's grace that I have been given and you have been given as well. Namely, we've been given the mystery that was made known by these revelations." It was not made known to other peoples at other times and in other generations, but it has now been gloriously and wonderfully revealed. And so we know that all people, even the Gentiles, are members of this same body, co-partners in the promise of Jesus Christ. The book of the prophet Isaiah tells us that nations shall walk by the light of Jesus, and kings shall be instructed by the shining radiance of his gospel. Raise your eyes, Isaiah says. Look about. See the world. See the people who say, keep your religion to yourself. Notice those many people who say, if you have faith, if you're silly enough to believe, keep it to yourself. We stand up today and say, no, we cannot keep it to ourselves. We cannot as easily keep our faith to ourselves as much as we would preach a gospel of hatred or violence. We can do neither of these. Rather, we, with great joy and hope and anticipation, preach a message of humility, compassion, mercy, and optimism, where the whole world is welcomed. No one is cast aside. No one is unwanted. It doesn't matter who you are, what you struggle with. You have a place at the bedside of the baby Jesus. You are welcomed with Mary, his mother, to worship and to pay your respects. You belong, and the whole world with us. This is what St. Paul says when we've been given a heritage. We've been given a responsibility. And as the Magi left, warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they returned to their homes, not silently, but with joy. They returned to their homes, bringing this gospel message, refusing to be silent, and spreading the message abroad, as we are sent from here to do the same. We are given the same stewardship that those wise magi were given. We are sent to bring this gospel message, not of violence nor of hatred, but a gospel message of love, compassion, mercy, and peace to the homes where we live, the dorms where we live, the places we work, the classrooms in which we study. We are sent like the Magi, never to remain silent out of joy, never to keep our hope to ourselves, but rather refusing to remain silent as much as we refuse to preach hatred or violence. Our mission thus is clear. Just as the Magi were sent, so are we. Our responsorial psalm summarizes our mission. Lord, every nation on earth will adore you. And the only way that the nations on earth will adore the Lord, the only way the nations on the earth, this earth, will know the Lord, is if we go forth from here and spread that message, is if we go forth and be the bringers of this joyful and good news.